Mary, obviously, we're waiting, and you've been in the position in the government when one of these things happen, and you're waiting to get information. We have to be careful as we get information. But when you look at these pictures right here, I hope you can see them. I'm not sure if you can, given the Skype hookup right here, but when you see the train dangling over the track like this, when you hear the little bit we know so far, this Cascades train going south, what are your biggest questions, or what can you conclude looking at this at the moment?
Well, I suppose the first thing that will come to everyone's mind, and I'm sure the NTSB investigators' minds, is this was the first day. According to the Amtrak schedule on their website, this was the first day of this new high-speed service. This was a new train, a new run. It's highlighted on their website that it could make the journey faster. And to have this happen on its maiden voyage will be of huge interest to the NTSB. They'll be looking at whether the tracks were sufficient for, I believe the train was going 81 miles an hour. That's a pretty high speed. It's not Japan bullet train speed, but that's fairly high speed. There's a report that there was a vehicle on the track, and you can't see that on an overpass. That wouldn't seem to make sense since it was on an overpass, but we don't know how much further ahead from these pictures the vehicle could have been. And then they'll also be looking at, since Amtrak apparently does not own the track, was the track, up for this high-speed service? Does it have? Probably not. Positive train control. So there's just so many questions for the NTSB to start, and I'm sure they're digging in already. I'll bet the team's already there.
And as the team gets there, Mary, we're obviously waiting from local officials. They say there are casualties. We don't know if those are just injuries or worse. Obviously, when you look at those pictures, it just raises your doubts. That's something right there. The sheriff says multiple cars struck by the train. No motorist fatalities. That's from the sheriff out there as we try to piece this together. You see so many, and God bless them, the first responders on the team there. I was looking just as we're about to come to air at the research on this so-called bypass project so they could have the trains go faster. What, from your memory in government service, what would be the testing? If those are going to be the questions here, were these tracks properly tested? Were there safety markers, whether it's the lights or the flashing, to keep people from being vehicles up on the tracks or the like? What are those procedures?
Exactly. You make a very, very good point. So many people think about the rails, and are they in good alignment, and are they able to handle the high-speed trains? But a very important point also is whether there are whistles and signals and timing to give persons who are crossing the track further up, obviously not on an overpass, but further up, if the warnings are sufficiently in advance, what the whistle timing is. All of this is, of course, in the black box on the train, when the whistle was supposed to be sounded, when it actually was sounded, but giving people warning to get off the track. Did the gates close soon enough if there was a vehicle on the track? All of that goes into planning for high-speed rail as well. And I did have a chance at one point in my career to do some work with Japan Rail. And for the bullet trains in Japan, there is no point on those bullet train routes. Now, they go much faster than 81 miles an hour, but there's no point where the traffic actually crosses the train tracks on those bullet trains, making their safety margins so much better where you don't have to intersect with cars and trucks and buses. Big difference.
Mary Scavo, I appreciate your insights. And again, if any information comes into you, please jump right back to us. I want to move the conversation now, though, to Richard Beal. He's a railroad operations and safety expert. He joins us on the telephone. Richard, just let me ask you straight up front. Are you able to see where you are, these pictures of the train dangling over the highway?
I'm looking at it right now.
Right, and what, just your first glance from your expertise, what are your questions?
Well, this overpass obviously is over some sort of a highway there, and it looks like a girder bridge that they're hanging off of. Generally, girder bridges of any type have guardrails on them. When I talk about guardrails, I'm not talking about on the sides. I'm talking about the middle of the track, that if wheels come off, the guardrails keep from wandering too far off of the track. And so I'm wondering what happened there. And I keep hearing different ones talk about it. They may have struck something. So I'm wondering what that could be, whether it is automobile or something somebody placed on the track like an act of sabotage, or whether it's something like a rock slide.
Richard, stay with us, please, if you can. I want to get back to our CNN correspondent, Stephanie Elam. She's in our Los Angeles bureau and has some new reporting. Stephanie, what's the latest?
John, just looking at what some of the eyewitnesses there on the scene who saw this, I mean, imagine driving to work, you're driving down the 5, and a train derails right in front of you. They were seeing it before actually first responders were even there. One woman, Danae Orlub, telling CNN that there was a semi-truck and also cars that were crushed underneath the train cars. Now, we did hear from the police department saying that there were no injuries or no deaths in those cars, but just letting you paint the picture of what this would look like. She said, quote, "We came around the corner and had to just have happened. There were no police there yet. There was one link of the train off to one side and the other on the other side of the freeway." But she says that when she came around that there were fire trucks, ambulances were racing to make their way there. Just to give you an idea of how this happened on the freeway as people are trying to make their way down this I-5 corridor on the southbound lanes. Looking to get still more information on this one, John, but just giving you an idea of what people were seeing there on the ground.
Stephanie Elam, appreciate that, and please stay with us, continue your reporting, and just raise your hand when you have more. We'll get it to our viewers as quickly as possible. Richard Beal, Railroad Operations and Safety Expert, back with me on the phone. Richard, you heard Mary Schiavo a bit earlier, I think. This is the Cascades train. It's supposed to be running south. They're trying to move them at higher speeds, and this was an inaugural run. From your experience, what kind of testing, would there be trial runs with empty trains? What would have gone into this before what we're watching unfold right now?
Well, generally, when you do something like that on track that doesn't have passenger service or hasn't had it in a while or whatever, they would run a series of test trains in advance that wouldn't have people on it or anything to see what they could do to maintain schedules, to see what they could do about different places where there might be restrictions on the track, slow orders on curves, all kinds of different things like that. I wouldn't suspect that this would be the first train ever over it. But I'm understanding there were passengers on this train. Is that what you understand?
Yes, the sheriff says there were passengers on the train, and it left early this morning on the inaugural run. It was supposed to be heading south on this train from Seattle, heading down toward Portland, is what we are told. That's what the Amtrak website says was the path of this train. Richard, I may be asking a bit too much, but just from your expertise, when you look at these pictures, the way the train is over the edge like this, the two cars side by side there, just tell me from your expertise what jumps out in your mind in terms of what the observations you can make from what you see or the questions you have based on what you see.
Well, boy, this is real speculation, but it is something catastrophic took place. I saw one picture where the locomotive looked like it was upright. So if they struck something on the track, I would have expected to see the locomotive peeled off to the side somewhere. But this looks like it's definitely back in the train. So whatever happened, whether the locomotive got over or got past whatever they struck, a lot of times the locomotive, if they strike something, will damage the rails, spread the rails, cause a rail to become broken, and a lot of the damage comes from behind. The engine will get over it most of the time. And that may be what took place here, but that's pure speculation.
And I want to apologize to our viewers. We're taking live feeds here from our affiliates out in the area on the scene. Sometimes the cameras pull away. We have no control over that. So, but obviously our affiliates are trying to provide us with the best coverage possible here, showing the traffic aftermath as well as the crash aftermath. Richard, appreciate your insights. I hope you can stand by for us. I want to bring Larry Mann, who's an attorney and a rail expert. He authored the Federal Railroad Safety Act into the conversation. Larry, again, we're in the early moments here. The Pierce County Sheriff says there are some injuries here. We don't know the extent of that. We don't know how serious they are. We don't know how many they are. I just want to ask you, Larry, if you're looking at these pictures, just what jumps out in your head, your initial reaction when you see, obviously, the heavy trauma to this train dangling over the tracks down onto the highway?
Well, the initial view of a derailment would be to look at the track to see if there were track defects. The next thing that I would look at would be the speed of the train. You're dealing with an inaugural movement. This is the first time this type of train movement has occurred. Speed and track are the two main things at the moment. You would look at, of course, the NTSB and the Federal Railroad Administration would be reviewing the so-called black box, which contains all of the data of the train movement. At this point, though, it's just too early to determine anything, but those are the two issues I would be looking at initially.
It is correct, and I appreciate that. Everyone, we need to be careful in what we say here, given that we're trying to get information as to exactly what happened. But Larry, given your expertise, this is the inaugural run of this train. They've been trying to increase the speed on the Cascade route out there on the West Coast. What would have happened? Again, I asked this of Richard earlier. I'm just trying to get it. What would have happened or what should have happened before this? If your question after a derailment is, was there some impediment on the track, or was there some defect with the track, or was there some safety issue where there weren't the proper alarms to clear the track beforehand, what should have been done beforehand?
Well, since this is an inaugural run, there should have been test runs of the speed of the train to determine the safety of the operation. I assume that was accomplished, but certainly with an initial run like this, with high speed, you certainly would have test runs under the exact same conditions.
Appreciate your insights, Larry. I hope you can stand with us as well. Just for any viewers joining us late, you're looking there on a split screen. This is a scene in Pierce County, Washington, an Amtrak train heading south from Seattle to Portland. A derailment there. You see the car dangling. That's Interstate 5 running north-south in the Pacific Northwest along the West Coast. The train car dangling over the track there. As we try to get more information, the sheriff says there are some injuries, or some casualties. We don't know the extent of that. You should remind you, this derailment happened in the peak of Monday morning rush hour on the West Coast. Drivers on the interstate say what they saw was beyond sobering. Here's what one eyewitness told CNN just a short time ago.
Well, so I was on the opposite way, so I'm far away from it now, but we came around the corner, and it's sobering, to say the least. It was, we were casually carpooling, having fun conversation, and you just knew when you saw it that something horrible happened, especially because it was a passenger train. There were cars on both sides of the bridge falling onto the freeway.
Cars on both sides, so it's not just this one angle that we see. There's cars on one side of the bridge falling off, and on the other side of the bridge as well.
Yes, and there's vehicles underneath those cars.
What types of vehicles? There were cars. Are they crushed by them or just impacted by them? What did you see?
Crushed. There appeared to be. It looked like a semi and a passenger truck that was underneath, the whole front end smashed in. I mean, it was a very brief moment, but that's what it looked like to me.
It just must be terrifying. Did you see anyone that seemed injured? Did you see any people walking about when you were there?
There were people getting out of their cars that were stuck in traffic. That's all I could see. There were no first responders there when I was there, but just an incredible amount of first responders headed that way as we continued down the freeway. That's when we knew it was bad.
When you came upon it, were they already dangling off, or did you hear anything?
They were already dangling off. I imagine if we hadn't stopped to get gas that we probably would have been there when it happened.